Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. Before we crack on with our interview today, I would like to thank our sponsor, Coros. Coros was very recently born after the coming together of Spreadfast and Lithium. Coros is a tech software company that has over 15 years of leadership in marketing, care and communities. And Coros now offers one platform that unites marketing and care and helps brands create customers for life. Please go and check those guys out at Coros.com. That's KHOROS.com. Okay, on with the show. Hello, my name is Tom Ollerton and this is the Shiny New Object podcast. It's a podcast about the future of marketing. And every week I get to interview someone inspiring, insightful, entertaining, or all three. And this week is no different. For the second time on the podcast, we have Jerry Daykin, who is now 2 months into being the EMEA Media Director at GSK. We'll hear more from Jerry in a sec. But also I'm meeting Jake Dubbins for the first time, who is the MD and co-founder of Media Bounty. I don't know a great deal about the agency, but they definitely make a really good cup of tea, so fantastic start. But Jake is also the co-chair of the Conscious Advertising Network. So it's a bit of a special in some ways, because I asked Jerry to be on the podcast again, and he said, well, I really want to talk about this thing called conscious advertising. Like, what's that? I don't really fully understand, so I'm very much playing the part of the person who doesn't really understand this. So I'm hoping by the end of this podcast that I'll walk away, and the audience as well, understanding what conscious advertising is. So Jerry, given that we've had you on the podcast before,
it's good to be back though.
Yeah, no,
thanks for having me.
Good. But Jake, tell us a bit about Media Bounty. What do you do here? But keep it short.
Yeah, very short. So we're a social media agency with a conscience. So we mainly work with socially conscious brands and brands who want to become socially conscious. And we cover insight, strategy, creative and media.
Brilliant.
We're going to play a drinking game where every time anyone says the word conscious, the listeners at home have to take a shot. Yeah. I can say that because I don't work at Diageo anymore, but you probably shouldn't play that actual game.
I'll go and get the drinks.
Yeah, it'd be a difficult podcast to drink to. Anyway, so Jerry, what are you doing? GSK?
I left Diageo at the end of last year after a couple of years there, and I've just joined as the EMEA Media Director. It rolls off the tongue. And I lead a team of 9 people working out where we should spend a few £100 million across Europe, Middle East and Africa in both traditional and digital media, which is exciting because really I'm a digital person, so I'm sort of a Trojan horse to help a bit with the digital transformation. But yeah, I'm super new in, so I'm kind of talking more from like my personal expertise and a bit of what we did at Diageo and stuff I'm passionate about, but definitely we'll be picking some of this stuff up as we move forwards.
So in preparation for this podcast, you sent us several links that you'd written. So we all, had about an hour's worth of that. Thanks. But in fairness, it was a very good article on LinkedIn, and you talked about how the last couple of years have been a bad year for trust and transparency in advertising, and I'm assuming that you guys are going to stem the flow of that eagerness with conscious advertising.
Single-handedly.
Have I got that right?
I think what we're talking about when we say conscious advertising in this big case is very much about like conscious media and media spin. So I guess there's all sorts of trends in the industry at the moment about advertising with a purpose and brands having a purpose, and there's a whole some interesting, some brilliant, some slightly crazy stuff out there. This is really about where we spend our money, and I said it quite jokingly, but a company like GSK or a Mondelez or a P&G or Unilever spends hundreds of millions, well actually billions of dollars of money in media, and I think the point my article was making is where we spend that money matters, and I think the digital industry has a rough ride over the last few years. Fairly fed up of talking about some of these things: brand safety, viewability, ad fraud. What the hell are we funding? And one of the reasons some of that stuff has come about is because we slightly took our eyes off the ball. Like in the days of TV, you would know exactly what channel your ads were appearing on, what content they were appearing alongside. You'd kind of almost know what your ads were funding and what you were allowing to exist. And the world of digital and programmatic and some of those things, we have a slight tendency as an industry not to worry as much about that, or even just the nature of those systems not to know. So where do our adverts end up? What do they appear alongside? what do we kind of accidentally end up funding? And I think for me, that's the point about being conscious about advertising is, a lot of brands over the last couple of years have done a lot around brand safety, so making sure that the really bad stuff doesn't happen. Some of the conversation starts to move on to maybe brand suitability, so like what content should I appear near that's good for my brand and not just not really, really bad. And I think that's got the call to arms around brand consciousness is if you think about the money you're spending as being almost an investment in the internet, and something that's been debated at a few industry events recently around trust and that side of things, but wouldn't you want your money to be funding really positive content, good content? There's an example of an organisation which represents local news companies, and by collecting some of that money in, they allow local news reporting to continue. Or the need to make sure some of that money goes to diverse news publications. So that's a bit of a long answer, but I think it's sort of the start of a journey to being more conscious about where we're spending our money and what that can do.
Yeah. So Jake, how bad can it get? What we're talking about here? I don't want to assume anything of the audience. So if it matters where our money goes, what are those situations when a brand spends some money and when it goes somewhere bad? What does that look like?
So, advertising largely funds the internet, right? The reason why we have the tools of Google and Facebook and the websites that we use is because largely the value exchange is that advertising funds that stuff for us and the audience listening. But the point is then what are we then funding? And the internet is a representation of largely humanity, right? And the internet has some pretty great stuff on it and some pretty awful stuff on it. And what brands, big brands, small brands are finding is that their advertising is inadvertently funding not just the sort of maybe benign or some of the stuff that is you might not want your brand to appear next to, but it's also funding terrorist content, it's funding organised crime, it's funding child porn, it's funding far right terrorist content, jihadi content.
Sorry, stupid question. How specifically is it funding those things?
So the Times did an investigation at the end of 2017 where YouTube channels big brands were advertising on YouTube channels that were funding ISIS and jihadi groups. So obviously Google's getting paid there, as are the people behind those channels. There was then the follow-up on child exploitation channels that were happening as well, and also more recently there's big brands funding far right content again on YouTube, but other parts of the internet as well.
So you've got some of these questionable channels producing like immoral content essentially, but then a brand says, I want to get these ads in front of these kind of people, and an algorithm somewhere goes, right, oh well, these guys seem to be talking about this thing, so your pre-roll for your FMCG product comes before some extremist content. Is that right? So that's
but it's done unconsciously. It's done inadvertently. No brand. The central question that we're trying to ask people is, do you want your advertising money to fund far right, terrorist content? Do you want your advertising money to fund child exploitation content? The answer that everybody will give will be no. So it's happening inadvertently, but I kind of feel that the time for the excuses of I don't know how it works, I don't know how the digital ecosystem works, is now over. And brands, the people that run them, the boards of brands need to take responsibility to understand what is in their supply chain to ensure that they're not inadvertently funding this stuff.
So how do they do that? Is that the role of the conscious advertising network?
Yeah, pretty much. We're saying that brands, place an awful lot of, brands are valuable, right? And brands have, a place in culture and in society. And there are people, we talk a lot about obviously brand safety, but it's also human safety. People are behind brands, people buy brands, people engage with brands. So yeah, it's up to the guardians, the stewards of those brands to ensure that they understand how their supply chain works, in the same way that the fashion industry has been, pulled over the coals as to where their how their products are made and what the supply chain looks like. It's the same with digital advertising. The technology's moved so quickly that the ethics haven't really caught up with where the technology's moved to.
I mean, yeah, YouTube is is in some ways a scapegoat, and in some ways for very good reasons. They, as a platform, they've done a lot to try and tackle this stuff, but unfortunately these bad actors don't usually label their content, oh, this is awful stuff, please avoid. So it's always a challenge. And then even beyond that, in terms of like sort of programmatic advertising, which is it's a long buzzword that effectively means we're using computers to talk to each other and decide where our adverts should appear. So rather than someone specifically saying, I want to appear next to that program on TV or that page of the newspaper, we say, computers, go and find me the right audience in the right place. And that, you can have programmatic campaigns that runs across tens of thousands of websites. And to your point, someone could set up a website with harmful content or very average content but trying to fund harmful content, and they would just partner with an ad network and they'd put a little banner ad thing there, and before you know it they're taking money and advertising. But even, to be honest, like that side of things, the absolute like extremes of that is only part of the problem. There was at the World Federation of Advertisers last week in Lisbon.
That's the most flamboyant name of all. It
really is. Global World Federation of Advertisers Global Marketer Week.
I always assume they have capes.
Do they have cape? Do you have a cape?
Not all heroes wear capes.
Jerry is wearing a cape.
In fact, there's a really great group of people trying to push the industry forward. And one of the things they put up on their main stage in front of the best part of 1,000 marketers was a debate around, is advertising what's wrong with the internet? They did one of those Slido vote things, and you can probably imagine that most marketers don't agree with that sentence, though by the end of the debate more of them did than at the start. And it's not all about truly awful terrorists and things like that, though that's clearly a shocking thing that we need to be aware of. Some of it's around really tedious things like clickbait, fake news, the fact that sort of websites which show celebrity plastic surgery slideshows where there's a great South Park clip where you try and click on the next arrow and it's not really the next arrow, it's a pop-up, and before you know it you're goodness knows where down this hole. Some of that stuff exists because marketers, agencies, somewhere in the mix, we're trying to drive programmatic performance, which means getting numbers on a spreadsheet down as cheaply as possible, reaching as many people, getting as many clicks as possible. And at times, not all marketers, not all agencies, definitely lots of advertisers have many settings in place and do more than this, but at times we don't pay enough attention to what we're funding, and we create an ecosystem in which actually to get the best of it, and even from responsible advertisers, you create or responsible platforms, you create an urge for publishers to have too many ads on their websites, to sort of have these kind of, you must click here to see, to get to the next thing, forcing you to watch stuff, just because the economics of marketers looking at a spreadsheet and trying to get cheap numbers don't always stack up with kind of creating a positive user experience. And the debate basically focused around the fact that we tend to think of advertising as this great democratizer of makes the internet free and allows people to have Facebook and YouTube and all this stuff for free, but it also creates a lot of disincentives in the system. And although I have a lot of sympathy for the vote, I definitely don't believe advertising is the end of the world. I think it's a powerful, great thing, but we do have to be responsible about what we fund and where advertising goes. And there are lots of positive commercials about that. It's not just about being there's a sort of like CSR, do the right thing for the world piece. There's a sort of absolutely don't fund truly awful stuff piece, but often there's a really good business benefit. If you pay more attention to where your media is going, it ends up in higher quality environments, it ends up being more likely to be seen and cared about by real people. And even some of the things we talk about around trying to prioritise, making sure that some of your media budget goes to sort of more diverse niche communities. For instance, at Diageo, we were starting an initiative to make sure some of our media went to LGBT and minority ethnic communities. Those are our communities with potentially big spending power who respond well to seeing brands in those local environments. And so there's a good commercial argument about doing the right thing and caring where your ads appear as well.
And on that commercial note, this is becoming now mainstream news. This is no longer just in the Drummond campaign. Not a kind of few days go past without it being reported in the press about what's going on in Facebook, what's going on in Instagram, what's going on in YouTube, and what's going on in the mainstream press. So people, not everybody, but people are becoming more aware of these issues and how advertising does fund the internet. And also there is that sort of there's a piece of research done recently about trust and about how the public view advertising, and apparently we're below bankers and politicians at the moment in terms of trust.
And they did the research like in November or something.
Depressing, isn't it?
Yeah,
like,
it's not like they did it before a current political crisis happened. In the middle of modern political crisis, they still decided advertising people should be trusted less.
Yeah,
than politicians.
because people aren't stupid, right? They do understand how advertising works. But there is I think there is a commercial benefit to being transparent about how you're advertising and what you're trying to avoid. I mean, certainly with what we're finding with the Conscious Advertising Network is we're finding that civil society is finding out about it and backing it. So, just last Friday, the NUS signed up to back the Conscious Advertising Network. Now that's millions of students or representative of millions of students that are saying, well, yes, we want a safe or a more kinder way of advertising on the internet.
So it seems like there's kind of two things here. There's where the ad gets placed and who's profiting from the placement of that ad, but then there's the kind of dark, naughty cousin, which is like clickbait and sort of fake news. Like, do you delineate between those two things? Are you going to tackle one before the other?
Depends on the news.
Because otherwise, aren't you going to get into a situation where you're just trying to get rid of bad stuff on the internet?
Yeah, and the aim is not to be like the moral arbiter. Like brands, the point is there's also the question of freedom of speech. So there's we've been consulting with groups like Article 19 who are massive defenders globally of freedom of speech. So the question is yes, people within the laws of the land can have the freedom to say what they like, but also brands are free not to fund that as well. And that's the critical thing. So it's not to say you can't say this and you can't say this unless it's genuinely breaking the law or harmful to other people. So it's not to be kind of like sitting here going, well, we're the truth tellers. It's like, but brands can choose to either fund that or not fund that, and should be taking more of an active role in deciding whether or not they're going to fund it.
So, when you say trying to fix the whole internet, the internet in some ways reflects human society.
Yeah, totally.
So like a platform like Facebook, the internet itself, YouTube, by the time you have 2 billion users, some of those 2 billion users are pretty
Totally
horrible
right.
people, unfortunately. And it reflects that. And it's not, advertisers or marketing's job to fix that. It's part of those platforms' job to try and fix that. It's also society's job, to try and fix that.
But advertising doesn't have to fund it.
Yeah, advertising doesn't have to fund it, and advertising doesn't have to create new bad behaviours. So, fake news, it sort of partly exists because people like sharing, crazy made-up stories, and there's a political agenda there. But, by my understanding, one of the main reasons it exists is because you can make lots of money, and you can make more money writing a story that Hillary Clinton secretly runs a pizza restaurant where children are trafficked than you can by writing a story that Hillary Clinton made a statement about her policies today and thinks she can do something good for the economy. And the reason you can make more money doing that is because those articles attract more shares and more comments, and they attract more eyeballs, and therefore they attract more money because they have banner ads on them, and they have, advertisers somewhere without, necessarily looking particularly closely, see, I've reached an extra 1,000 people today and it only cost me a few pence, and isn't that marvellous? And so some of the asks are, it's a fairly simple ask, and I think, the Conscious Advertising Network has a sort of a good framework around this, but it just starts by being kind of conscious of this stuff. For instance, if an agency comes back to you as a brand marketer and says, great, this is the performance of the campaign you've just run, these are your cost per click, these are your cost per 1,000 impressions, do you also ask, great, where did I run? Can you also produce a list of the websites that ran on me? It might be as simple a step as that.
Or that I didn't run.
Or I didn't run, yeah. And many big companies do have, list of websites they do want to appear on, list of websites they don't, etc. But if you start by looking at that, and if you get back, a few hundred websites where you recognise and understand what they are, you're probably in a very high quality place. If they give you a list of 200,000 sites you ran against, and a lot of them truncate into a section of like other websites, then potentially you're not paying as much attention as you could to where your media ends up. And then definitely that you move forward to thinking about, okay, so maybe the reason that I appear on so many websites is I've never mentioned to my agency that I don't want to. So next time you brief them, you say, hey guys, yes, performance is really important to me, but so is quality. So can we have a conversation around where we would get a good list of websites that we should prioritize? Can we have a conversation around limiting the extent to which we appear upon a really long tail of websites? Can we have a conversation about deliberately upweighting some partners that we think are sort of interesting? They might be interesting because they're really relevant to your brand. They might be really interesting because you want to have, deliberately supporting some of these, all sorts of different causes, if you don't mind the word, you might want to support, like local news, like LGBT voices, and it's almost as simple as, I think the name, like being conscious about it, and a lot of the good starts just by asking a few of those simple questions, and that cuts off some of the bad stuff. It makes it happen in a manageable way. Brands are always going to be conscious of the cost and the effectiveness of advertising. So don't throw everything out the window, but start asking yourself, what are we doing? Could we do more?
Yeah. And is there any technology to support that? That sounds perfectly sensible, but is there a tool that can, like whether that's dare I say it, an AI tool that can crawl through different articles and come back with a relevancy score or a trustworthy score or a quality score? Is that in place? So because if I was a client and I said, oh well, I don't want to go near any of that nasty stuff, and you send me a list of 200,000 websites, how long is that going to take me to click through and check all those links?
Yeah. Or
even a cursory scan of the URLs isn't really going to tell me that much. So unless it's a long list of newspaper titles that I recognise, how do you actually start to get to the place where you can recognise good from bad?
There are tools, and there are tools in development. This is still a kind of fairly early stage. There's an organisation called Fact Matter, for example, that are looking at content and looking at sequencing of words to understand whether or not that sort of typical fake news tropes, for example. There's a fairly new organisation called NewsGuard who hit the news recently, where they look at and almost give, like, on sort of foods, they'll give ratings of and sort of traffic light systems. They'll traffic light certain websites, and that will be anything from our mainstream news to they recently had a look at Goop, the website that Gwyneth Paltrow's site, and gave that a pretty low rating in terms of Goop. Is it true? Does it, for example, apologise if it's got something wrong?
And is this
How's it funded?
Is this like a Chrome plugin thing where
before
you arrive at the site there's a little red flag or an honesty?
But the critical thing is that it's got to be married between technology, and the reason why we've got ourselves to this place is that we've over-relied on the technology and not had that kind of, what are we as humans going to be happy to advertise on. So there's a partnership between the technology, but also making sure that we are, as we've said, conscious of what we're asking the technology to do. So, to Jerry's point earlier, depending on what sort of choices that you want to make, it absolutely can be positive choices that you're making. So, for example, we work with some of the B Corp community, and how we're taking as a business, how we're taking the conscious advertising network is that we don't want to have brands that we're working with funding climate change denial, for example.
Can you go back one step and explain what B Corp is?
Yes, so that is a group of businesses that are it's an organisation where you get rated for your sustainability credentials, how you treat your staff, how you use energy, how you treat clients, how you work within the system. So you get B Corp rating. We're not a B Corp, we're working to become one. So you basically have to recycle. Havas, for example, have recently become a massive, that's a big company who've become a B Corp.
Good work, Havas.
Yeah, really good work. So, it's easier actually for smaller businesses to do it because we've only got 20 odd people, so it's easier for us. But a business like that size to do it is really good.
Impressive, yeah.
So you can make those sort of positive choices to go, right, here's what we believe as a brand, here's what we believe as an agency. So therefore, if we're going to say, we want to fund LGBTQ communities, we want to fund, local news, we want to fund, ethnic minority communities, we don't want to fund, in our case, climate change denial, then you can kind of turn it into quite a positive commercial good story for the brands that you're working with as well.
Yeah, I'm not. There's not necessarily a silver bullet. Some brands are approaching different ways. Like Unilever, as part of the speech that Keith Weed gave last week, announced that they were launching a sort of a trusted partner network. It's similar to the thing we had, the trusted marketplace we launched when I was at Diageo, and Nestle has a similar thing, and a few other companies do, which is really saying you'll only buy media from companies who jump through quite a few hoops and commit to all sorts of things around brand safety, viewability, ad fraud. That's a real specific. We'll only buy from this X number of people approach, and it can involve dozens or tens or maybe probably less than hundreds of partners. And that's definitely one way to approach it. That's not right for everyone. There are certainly limitations to that, especially because
what are the limitations?
Well, I mean, if you only pick from a very small set of websites, like kind of ones you could name, you're playing into some of the challenges we face around having a big dominant duopoly. You are not giving an opportunity for smaller websites, which you potentially would like to be funding, to come up in the mix. You also, when marketers start layering on data and trying to target really specific people, if you don't have a fairly big, pond to fish in, it can be hard to find the right people. But there are ways for solving all of those. There are certain platforms and networks, things like Teads and Unruly, which are sort of networks that will only sell you video advertising across relatively premium journalism. So they have partnerships with many of the traditional news publications and fairly premium websites, and so working through a network like that, you can have a fair confidence that you're landing on decent quality. Or there are other ways. You can take ComScore's list of the top 500 most visited websites in a country, and that's a list you could probably check through fairly quickly and sense check whether there are any that you were cautious about. Or if you work with an agency or through an ad network, or a lot of these people now have the beginnings of these lists. If you ask them, do you have a list of sort of recommended sites, approved sites that we can start with and focus? They can. But all of those, the more you limit where you want to appear and who you want to appear on, there are often implications for how much your media costs. It can mean costing more because some of this long tail of not so good stuff is cheaper.
And there's the tension.
But
right? So you guys are the white knights of conscious advertising, and I, as I said at the start, knew very little about this, and it's very persuasive. But then you've got some lady or chap who's got to smash their targets at end of quarter, and the lad upstairs, his targets are based on volume or reach or clicks or whatever it is. How do you solve that? Because you guys are doing the right thing. I'm not arguing that, but there's human nature, and people don't get into advertising to be good people, in my experience.
No, but most people aren't bad. But most people aren't bad though. Most people don't want to fund this stuff. I agree that we have the problem with the modern system is that you've got quarterly results that you've got to deliver. But the other thing is do you also want to appear, and do you want to be doorstepped by BBC and Sky going, oh, your brand's funding this? So there is both a commercial risk to the brand, a personal risk to you as an individual by getting doorstepped by your brand appearing next to some pretty awful stuff. And people do that all the time. The BBC are currently investigating Instagram self-harm content after Molly Russell. They're investigating anorexia and eating disorder content as well, and brands appearing next to that. So yes, you've got targets, but and I agree with Jerry. Obviously, as you shrink the pool of publishers that you appear on, then you increase the cost. But it's but at what cost? If you're funding some of the stuff that we've talked about. Brands are part of society. Brands are part of culture. They have a responsibility. You can't just put your head in the sand and ostrich yourself and go, we've got to hit numbers, so therefore we'll take the risk.
So that's. But the only thing I'd say, there are yes, but there are also fairly solid marketing reasons why you would do this, and some of that is about how we move the industry forward in terms of what we measure. So if we look at TV and what we talk about in TV, and don't tell my new boss this, but I don't know that much about TV. But anyway, when we look at TV and we've just changed agency, for instance, and when you change agency and you do a pitch and that kind of thing, you ask an agency, speaking hypothetically, like how cheap can you make my TV? That's a question you ask, but you always caveat that with that. But I want to maintain the same levels of like quality, and in TV you measure quality through a bunch of things, but often it's to do with the percentage of prime time you appear on, where you appear in breaks, which break in a show you appear on, how much they spread you between, like, you know, in the UK, between the ITV, the biggest channel in the world, and the long tail of much smaller channels. So some fairly established means by which we talk about quality, and historically we haven't had quite so much of a sense of quality in the digital world. So you have a CPM, cost per 1,000 people you've reached, and it appears in a sort of a tracker for how your media is doing, and as you know, some sense that actually not every website, not impression is equal.
Yeah.
But there haven't been as much an opportunity to look at the quality, or even beyond the quality, what the actual business impact is. And one of the things that is naturally having a positive impact on this is that marketers are starting to ask this. So the buzzword of the last couple of years about viewability, you know, making sure I appear on websites where consumers actually genuinely have a chance to see my advert, where they've scrolled past it, where it's been on screen for a longer enough period of time, is effectively starts to be a measure of quality, and does start to weed out some of the really bad, low quality adverts, places that you wouldn't want to be anyway. And when we talk about moving from some of these, you know, this long tail of cheaper inventory to this higher quality inventory, it isn't just suck it up for the good of your business. It's, you know, actually it costs a bit more, but it costs a bit more because it's a bit better as well, or maybe even a lot better. Yeah. So you're appearing in much more high quality environments where you know, as a brand manager, you're proud to have your adverts, and people are more likely to see them. People are more likely to remember them. So it can stack up, but yes, the digital industry. One of the reasons we're in this slight situation is because, you know, somebody invented KPIs and digital dashboards and an ability to have a really black and white view of how much stuff costs and whether people are clicking on it. And those aren't necessarily the best metrics in terms of overall how effective is your marketing.
And that often, and certainly from, you know, speaking to CMOs or marketing directors about this, you know, that is still often where the conversation stops. It is numbers. It is what's my reach, what's my frequency, what's my CPM, but not, and to your point earlier, and where, you know, because there's still, I think, quite a lot of education that needs to be done at senior level within businesses. A lot of people that we talk to haven't heard of GSK, for example. So GSK is the industry body that's been put together by the industry leaders, so, you know, ISBA and the IPA and IAB, to monitor and to certify for ad fraud, funding things like terrorism and organised crime, and for brand safety. But there are still quite a lot of people in charge of quite a lot of budgets that are not even aware that exists. So how can they demand that their agencies adhere to these good practice principles without kind of even knowing about it?
It seems to me, and I may just be being naive here, that there needs to be a value or a metric that is universally understood, because it seems to be there's this sort of balance between location, like where's the ad is being placed, and how quality is that placement. I might be able to see all of that advert, and obviously the benefit to either the community or the publisher that is behind that. And then doesn't there need to be like a rating or a score that it's, so yeah, we got a CPM of X, or we got a click-through rate of Y or whatever, but actually, even though this was quite expensive, it's a 6 out of 10. Yeah, surely that would be good.
Yes. Can I have it, please? Yeah. Yes. And as I say, we're moving in that direction. So there are platforms like Moat and IAS and things like this, which are tech companies who you put a little tag on all the ads you serve, and they're sort of third-party verification platforms. So they come back with scores around things like how viewable was it, how brand safe was it, and you start to see advertisers moving beyond just looking at a CPM, but looking at a human viewable cost per 1,000 people, and then definitely you start seeing them score it based on, you know, how brand safe was that place I ended up, and trying to include that quality score. I've seen some advertisers as I hinted earlier, also bringing in like where in the ComScore rankings for how big a website this is. There are sort of different ways of trying to bring some of that in. None of them perfect. I mean, I've worked for a couple of different companies. We've used different technology. Does it work? It pushes you in the right direction. They for instance, a technology tries to produce a score for how brand safe the environment is. Typically, actually, a lot of advertisers will use that same technology to block them appearing in unsafe places. So it usually reports that the place they appeared was brand safe. But it's limited by the ability of a technology to recognise keywords and the environment.
You would have thought the processing power would be absolutely mental. Because if you're going up with hundreds of thousands of sites to crawl all of those sites and potentially even in real time, given the nature of some content.
That's what happens though. When you serve adverts, we're talking about lots of bad things. Almost all major advertisers will have the beginnings of this in place. They will have a lot of settings in their DSP and the technology they use to buy advertising, which say don't appear next to any of these words, don't appear next to sites in these topics, in these categories. So there's a piece of that that's happening, and somehow millions of somehow those technologies do that calculation in the minute of like, here's someone arriving at this website, who wants this banner ad? Oh no, this person won't have it because it's got this word on it, and somehow the technology works its way out. But that's only the sort of the beginnings of like a quality score in terms of, I don't entirely know who would be the people to rate the quality of websites, but and some of it becomes very subjective. Like you hinted earlier, obviously there is stuff to do with hate speech and lies and fake news and stuff that we should find ways to combat. But if it's a website that has a strong political opinion, but it's absolutely within the law for it to be communicating that opinion, that becomes a bit of a brand by brand decision about whether they'd want to be there or not.
But isn't it the job of the multinationals to create this technology? Pointy question, but shouldn't GSK be developing that technology to make sure that nothing that they produce goes out, or you're outsourcing that responsibility to the media agency? Without
speaking specifically to GSK, but speaking for many advertisers I work for, those advertisers, Mondelez, Diageo, these people are experts in making cookies and drink and pharmaceutical drugs to make people's lives better. So we're not necessarily a powerhouse in terms of building media technology.
But you are experts in consumer safety, though, right? So the alcohol doesn't get served to 12-year-olds.
Yes, and a huge responsibility. And I guess that's part of my interpretation of what the conscious advertising network is asking of clients. It's not necessarily saying, hey clients, you guys should be able to individually build technology that solves this stuff, but it's saying, hey clients, you realise that if you made this part of your brief to your agency every single time, your agency would either find that technology or find partners who can find that technology. And there were definitely startups in this space. I've mentioned Moat and IS. Those guys their businesses are booming because they've gone from being unheard of third-party tagging to like major brands want to put their tags on every single piece of content they do. And the next question becomes, now they've got a lot of momentum, can they take their technology to the next level? So I would say the responsibility of a big multinational advertiser is to put pressure into the system and put their money where their mouth is and ask the platforms that they buy from, the agencies they work with, to come up with solutions to this and potentially to hold their money back when they don't, rather than necessarily come, it's not to say that advertisers couldn't be exploring startups and ways of doing that.
And also, I think to open source it and to open source the results, rather than having sort of, we're going to work on a particular, this is a massive problem for us as human beings and in society. So actually, if we're all sharing best practice in an open source way, then we fix the system, as opposed to, we talked about trust, and us as advertising professionals are not trusted. That's not a particularly cool thing to be, right? I'd be far better. I'd be far more proud of us all working together in an open source environment to fix some of these problems, to actually drive trust back as well. The other thing to say is, like, there's a massive commercial imperative here as well. You talked about sort of human and non-human traffic. A lot of money's wasted on non-human bot traffic or non-viewable ads. So by trying to take that out of the system, then your advertising money is spent and goes further. We're doing a test at the moment from an ad fraud point of view with a company called Fenestra, who are blockchain solution, and what they do is look and shine a light really on each stage of the process, from agency to DSP. So basically at every stage of the supply chain, from agency to technology provider to supply side to publisher, and just be able to say to the client, here's what you spent £1 million and here's where it all went, because everybody's taking money a cut all the way through. So I think the Guardian did an experiment where they spent £100 and actually £30 only finally went on their ads. So £70 out of that £30 is being taken out. So this organisation Fenestra that we're trialling at the moment, can shine a light on that, which then drives better returns for the client, right? It's their money, it's their responsibility.
Yeah, and I'd say with that kind of 70-30 waterfall, as we like to call it, where every step, every partner you work with, they take a bit of the money. One of the key things from a client perspective is trying to have transparency of that. Totally. and seeing it, because some of the people that take your money along the way may be well worth it. Like they've given you extra data or technology or something that's been totally worth it.
As long as the value's there, right? As long as you're transparent and the value's there, rather than just, here's another 10% that you don't kind of know about. And
And then, ad fraud, you touched on briefly then, and we could do a whole separate podcast. See you in a year, Tom.
Are you bored of us yet?
But ad fraud is a really interesting one. It's, depending on whose numbers you believe in, no one really knows how big it is. It's anywhere from hundreds of millions to tens of billions. It's, a lot of money. And ad fraud is the sort of the part of the money advertisers lose that is someone at the other end is quite deliberately doing it. So one way or another, there are different ways of doing ad fraud. From you can have a website which loads and stacks lots of banner ads on top of each other, through to much more sophisticated stuff, which a lot of it is nowadays, which is where basically they spoof traffic by either putting some people have malware on their computers or even their phones nowadays, which whilst you're browsing the internet, in the background it's loading hundreds and hundreds of websites just to sort of fake impressions.
Google exposed that with I can't remember what the company was called that they worked with, where they exposed and people have been arrested.
It's serious FBI stuff. And then there was a video on LinkedIn or other social networks recently just showing like click farms, which typically hundreds or thousands of mobile phones all rigged up into some sort of complicated rig, just loading stuff. And it's an interesting one because as an advertiser we have ways of trying to track it and measure it, and it's usually a fairly small percentage, and it's a sort of slight thorn in your side that you're not as effective as you could be if you could get rid of that. But if you think about where that money's going to, it's potentially terrifying because, click farms are not run by, friendly, lovely people trying to make the world a better place. They're effectively, it's a form of cyber crime. It's, one of the biggest crimes in the world at this day. That's a slightly sweeping statement with little facts to back up.
Adobe have said that ad fraud is the second biggest funder of organised crime behind the drug trade.
Yeah, bad stuff. Bad people get hold of money. What do bad people do with money? They spend it on bad things. So, drugs trade, terror. There's if you spend too much time with someone trying to sell you ad fraud software, you'll very rapidly get terrified. But it's a real reality that's an extreme example again of marketers. And in that case, obviously, marketers don't want fraud, so they're trying their best to sort of avoid it, and they'll, try and, use technology and things to track it. But again, there's a call to the action to the industry about how we stop that happening, and some of that is just the incredible complexity in how we buy media and different platforms trading with one another, and we're trying to find ways in industry to mean that through that chain, we're less likely to lose money along the way.
So, wanting to wrap this up. It's interesting. You've taken me
tie a nice bow on that simple conversation.
Well, I will attempt.
I apologise if you lose listeners for this.
I will attempt to do so. And so, at the start, I was like, "Oh, well, this is nice," and a bit of me was like, "Well, this is typical advertising bullshit, where agencies trying to make themselves seem interesting because they're considerate to minorities." Or I think that a bit of a bugbear about everyone going on about diversity, for example. Like, if you actually cared about it, you'd have always been doing it. You don't just start doing it in 2018, right? However,
still good to start doing it in 2018 if you haven't done it before.
Well, I think it's got to be a genuine thing. Anyway,
you've got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk.
So, but I think that you've shown both sides of a coin, I think, really, really well. So on one side, it's like, well, we want to support niche communities. We want to do do the right thing for the right reasons. We don't want to be seen as politicians or other kind of shitheads. We want to get that trust level back up. It's cool, as you said. It's cool to be trusted and be a nice person. So there's a very warm, aspirational side of what you're doing, which
is good, but not all brands will buy into.
Of course, but some people absolutely. But then on the other side of it is the commercial imperative. So like if you loads of bots are seeing your content, or people aren't seeing all the ad in its entire beauty, then you're not getting value for money. You're getting 30 quid out of a pound, or 30 out of 100, or whatever it is. But the idea that click farms and click fraud is the second biggest funder of terrorism, and then the idea that the BBC might knock on your door, I think you have an incredibly compelling proposition there, from wanting to do good but also desperately trying to avoid going off the end of the cliff. So if someone's listening to this podcast still at this point, how can they get involved? What is the number one step that you'd want listeners to do?
So from our point of view, look on Conscious AdNet. And
what's the URL?
It's consciousadnet.co.uk. And it's also and also to sign up to the manifestos. It's basically take the manifestos and put them into your agency briefs to make sure that you are helping helping the ethics catch up with the technology. So sorry, no, I can't believe that I forgot like I said, this is not my day job. So it's consciousadnetwork.com. So have a look there. It's backed by ISBA, so it's backed by the main industry body who represent advertisers in the UK, and the 6 manifestos are there. Have a look, sign up to it, publicly back it if you can, and hopefully we can drive system change.
And I'd just say, if you're a client or an agency, just start, you touched a bit earlier, but start by doing some of these basic questions of just like, and a lot of what the manifesto is ask some basic questions. So just start asking, where are my ads going? Could we be doing more to make them go in the right place? I think there are loads of interesting organisations out there. These guys, the news people I mentioned earlier, like United for News, who are basically they're a more literal ad network you can buy across small news people. At Diageo, we've been starting to work with an organisation called Brand Advance, which focuses on LGBT and minority communities. There are lots of different sort of people starting to move in this space, but it all starts by saying, are we doing anything? Where are my ads appearing? And I think that's if you're a brand marketer listening to this, next time you have a meeting with your agency, just ask that question. I think it's a good starting point.
Well, I do a lot of these podcasts, and I really feel that I'm actually contributing something of real value here. So if anyone is listening to this, absolutely go to consciousadnetwork.com. There's some clear actions there. Let's make the internet a better place.
Can I just say one more thing?
Fucking hell, that was like a really tight finish.
It really was. But last time I came on, and I think your viewers, listeners, have been really eager to know about the Internet of Things progress I've made in my house.
Okay.
And last time I came on, I just installed a new doorbell, which when it rang, it appeared on my telly so I could see the person was. And breaking news, I've missed a delivery during this podcast. Because on my Apple Watch, I saw a picture of an annoyed delivery driver standing outside my doorbell, happily ringing the doorbell, but I was, despite all the wonders of technology, unable to speak to him because I'd have had to take a break from the podcast.
What were we getting delivered?
I don't know. I'll update you next year when I come back. It could be a new backpack, actually. I ordered a backpack off an Instagram ad. I decided I wanted a new backpack a few weeks back. So I Googled it for a while, looked at a few, wasn't happy with what I found, and have been relentlessly followed by the rucksack advertisers of the world over the last few weeks. But eventually they got me. So.
It wasn't us.
I can recommend previous guest Adam Boiter. He makes Boiter bags, vegan leather, a conscious bag, so no guilt whatsoever. So I'll put that in the show notes. I always say that, I never do. Anyway,
well, thanks for that. And now I've completely ruined your wrap-up, and now we have no idea what we were talking about. But
I'll be amazed if anyone's still listening at this point. But
if you are, send us a message if you've made it this far.
Thanks so much, guys.
Cheers. Thanks, Tom.